So last year I talked about a Nickelodeon video game, and earlier this year I talked about a Cartoon Network crossover comic, so now let's look at a Nickelodeon crossover game, which is easily one of their most popular series of video games to date, Nicktoons Unite. The first Nicktoons Unite game was released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, DS, and Game Boy Advance. It was Nick's big crossover action-adventure video game series. Sure, we had some racing games before, and later some sports and fighting games, but this was Nick's big action-packed collaboration between four of their biggest faces. SpongeBob, their mascot, Jimmy Neutron and Timmy Turner, who already had a crossover episode at that point, and Danny Phantom, because they needed a fourth person and they already had a Butch Hartman's show, so I guess they figured why not have another. The plot of the first game has the villains from each of their shows forming their own alliance to destroy their worlds. Plankton, Dr. Calamitous, Mr. Crocker, and Vlad. Yeah, something these guys can learn from their Cartoon Network counterparts is that there's really no world to rule once it's destroyed. This causes Jimmy, Timmy, Danny, and SpongeBob to team up to stop each of them in 4 different levels designed after each of the worlds from each of the shows, as well as a bonus level where the gang shrinks down inside of Goddard, and of course a final boss level to face off against all the villains together. And the game even ends with opportunity for a sequel, which they quickly cashed in just the next year, with the sequel game, Battle for Volcano Island. This time, the crew ends up on an island inhabited by crab people who see them as chosen ones sent to fend off an evil volcano god. As I mentioned in passing with my Nicktoons Racing review, Jimmy Neutron is delegated from main player to more tutorial segments here. As a replacement, we get other characters from these shows to play as, like the fairies, Sam, Tucker, Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward. I haven't played any of these games. I mean, I'd like to, they seem fun, and I'd like to see how they work, but considering how some people have praised them versus some of the critic reviews I've seen, they seem like they can run pretty hot and cold with audiences. From what I've heard, the first game is said to have a good story, but the level design is apparently too big and the music surprisingly dull, even for the big fighting-based levels. Compared to what I've heard about the second game, which I hear has better level design, and they turned it more into a platformer. And apparently the controls are slightly better in this one as well. And then there's the fourth game, Globs of Doom. Yeah, how do you screw up the CGI on a character who was already CGI? Also, what the hell is up with Zim's mouth? It's like always opened, even when he's not talking. It's like a bad ventriloquist act. Oh yeah, apparently this game swapped out Timmy and the Fairies with Zim and Dib, probably because they already had plenty of Fairly OddParents games by that point in 2008. Today we're going to be looking at what was marketed as the most ambitious of the series. More playable characters, grander scale level design, even more crossovers to work with. The third in the series, Attack of the Toybots. The game was released in 2007 for the PS2, DS, and Nintendo Wii, and I remember it being hyped up as one of their biggest games at that point. Wow, new characters to play as? Non-story-based battle mode? You know, before Super Brawl came out? Even though I didn't end up getting the game as a kid, I knew I had to get it once I saw people started requesting me to talk about some of these Nicktoons Unite games. Does this game live up to the hype? Let's find out. This is Nicktoons Unite, Attack of the Toybots. Alright. Also, I gotta throw this in. What is up with the design of these evil teddy bear things? Like, I know this came out before Toy Story 3, but it's seriously just giving me vibes of Lotso Huggin' Bear from Toy Story 3. What is up with that? The game begins with Dr. Calamitous entering a contest for the Smartest Genius Award, as he's showing off his latest invention, Toybots, robot replicas of Nicktoon heroes that he made out of ghost hunting technology, and they're powered by fairies' Krabby Patty farts. I wish I was making that up. It really is that stupid. To the surprise of nobody, he's going to use this to take over the Nickelodeon Extended Universe. Though, it is kind of sad to see some of the other villains missing out on this. Yeah, no Plankton, Mr. Crocker, or Vlad in sight. Meanwhile, in Bikini Bottom, we see Patrick and SpongeBob driving to do a Krabby Patty delivery at a quite suspicious factory, filled with robots. Huh, look at that. Something that this Nick crossover and the CN crossover comic have in common. Evil robot replica factories. The bots kidnap Patrick and SpongeBob has to make his way in what is basically a training level to get you used to the platforming and the attack moves. We'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the game proper. SpongeBob gets into the factory and rescues Patrick. Here we see some of the other main players. Timmy and his fairies once again, who seem sick from being force-fed Krabby Patties, and they also end up coming across Tack. Oh yeah, Tack's in this game. Guess I gotta talk a little bit about that. Tack was a video game series made in the early 2000s by Nickelodeon, and years after the game was even remotely popular, they tried making a TV show that wasn't that successful. The games were actually pretty good, but I personally wasn't that into the show for the very brief period that it was on. I feel like Tak being in this game, as well as Globs of Doom that followed, was just a last-ditch effort to try and promote the show. Thankfully, Tak's personality from the games is on display here compared to his more oddball outcast persona from the show.
The power of juju tells me that there are other heroes here. Where? I don't know, trapped somewhere. Come on.
You know what? Good on them for being more in tune with the good side of the Tak series here. So along the way, you take out more and more Toybots, and you rescue more Nicktoons heroes. Next on the list being Jimmy, as he joins the rest of the main cast. Here, you get a little bit used to the controls, and I'll tell you, the controls in this game are okay. It does take a little getting used to, but once you've played it for a while, you get used to it. Some of the jumps feel a little bit BS, but it's very few and far in between. It's not that much of a problem. Just hope you're ready to see these factories, because a majority of the game takes place in them. I find it interesting that this game really seems to favor SpongeBob, Tak, and then later Danny, as they're the ones you end up playing the most as. I mean, it made sense in the previous game, since SpongeBob and Danny were the first characters we see, and we followed them throughout a majority of the game, but we have plenty of characters to work with here, and we barely do much with them. They do give you some more opportunity to play as these characters later on, but for now it just feels a little bit odd. And it also doesn't really help that Globs of Doom's official title is SpongeBob featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom. Like, wow, good job Nickelodeon, way to show favoritism there. Though if I can give the Sponge some compliments, it's good to see that SpongeBob's tongue-writing ability is back from Battle for Bikini Bottom. Oh, and speaking of other characters that you can play as, I gotta bring this up now. While you're in these factory levels, there are special areas that you can go into to rescue other Nicktoons characters who've been kidnapped to have Toybot replicas made out of them. So here are the advertised other characters that you can play as and unlock in these little side missions. You got Stimpy from Ren and Stimpy, Rocco from Rocco's Modern Life, Gur from Invader Zim, the favorite amongst the Hot Topic crowd at the time, and Jenny from Teenage Robot. Oh, I see the pattern that they're doing. Yeah, you got 2 classic shows from the 90s, and then you got 2 shows that Nickelodeon horribly screwed over. Wiz, Let It Go. Oh, yes. Okay, okay. So it is cool that you get to play as these characters, but you don't actually get to play as them during the main game. Like, is anyone else bummed out by that? You got 5 new characters to work with, and only one of them is a main player, and of all people, it's Tak. Meanwhile, these guys can't step into the main game. If I was one of the unlockable characters here, you know, you're made to promote the game, but you're not actually in the game's main story, I'd be pissed. Alright, well, to the game's credit, they do make up for this by putting them in battle mode.
Multiplayer showdowns, head-to-head battles.
Which is pretty awesome, so props to them on that. Back in the main story, the gang ends up in the basement of the factory, where we see one of Calamitus's robots who doesn't want to be part of the plan anymore.
What do you think, Mr. Chadbot? Can you help us?
Help you? Would my dimensional communicator that allows you to talk to your friend Danny Phantom help you?
You bet! What are we waiting for, big guy?
What we are waiting for, big hair, are more action figures to add to my collection. These are some of the master models that Professor Bad Mustache created. Each one a perfectly crafted replica of the heroes he borrowed. You bring me more for my collection, and I'll let you use the dimensional communicator to talk to your friend.
Chadbot, collecting amiibos before it was even a thing. So they get a call from Danny, who says that his world is now being attacked by giant robot duplicates, which leads to the gang busting out some mech suits in a pretty good fighting level. It's good, albeit very difficult, and I think that's mainly just because of the controls. This part of the game might be better on multiplayer, because when you're on single player, half the time it feels like you're being ganged up on. But in multiplayer, you actually might have some other people to have your back and help you take out some of these guys. And the biggest pain in the ass, at least to me, is the controls on the Wiimote. There's only so much that you can do with this thing, and really, I resorted to button mashing and flailing the controller half the time. As do most people using a Wiimote, am I right? I'm willing to believe this would be a lot easier on a PlayStation controller, because, you know, it's an actual controller. Anyway, I had to play this like 4 or 5 times until I eventually got somewhere with it. But Calamitus ain't done yet, since he's now setting his sights on Fairy World for more power, meaning that our last venture will be there. So you go around another factory like you've been throughout the entire game, except here it's really long. Maybe that was their justification for making it the last level. Still makes more sense here than it did in Awesome Possum. And you know what? Going back to what I said earlier about the unlockable characters, it is kind of cool to see them in action here. I mean, it does kind of make it seem like one big group effort, like unleashing all the Nicktoons characters to save the day together. And there's even plugs for other Nickelodeon shows like El Tigre and Cat Scratch. You know, other Nick shows that deserve more of a fair shake, but I digress. Anyway, it's the ending of the game. Let's see what does Calamitus' plan in.
The winner of the biggest genius is...
The Chatbot! Chatbot! It is you, Mr. Chatbot, that has magnificently combined all the theme ingredients. Krabby Patties, fairies, and ghost energy. In true genius fashion, you have gone even further to create the greatest collection of action figures in the world.
Huh, so Chadbot got the award for smartest genius, and he also got his entire collection complete. Huh. So in the end, Chadbot turned out to be a total Chad. It's probably the best way to end the game, honestly. So that was Nicktoons Unite Attack of the Toybots. It's very long, and some of the level design can get a little repetitive for some players, but I still think it's a pretty solid game. The graphics are pretty good, even if Jimmy Neutron looks a little bit off. Not as bad as Globs of Doom, but he's getting there. The controls are fine, but I think it really depends on what console you're playing this on. I can't really say much about the PlayStation version, but considering how effed up the controls can be in certain levels on the Wii version, it has to be better. Or at least a little easier to adapt to the controller. The story works pretty well for the most part, evil robot duplicates and the heroic originals having to team up and take them all out. Like I nitpicked earlier, it would have been cooler if the unlockable characters actually did become main parts of the game, but they did make up for that with battle mode, and it is pretty cool to play as these guys for the time that they are on screen. The only problem I could see some people having with this game is that the levels do range a little long, and sometimes the level design is pretty open. As difficult as the mech suit fight level was, it was pretty refreshing to actually get outside the factory location. I will give them this though, compared to what I've seen of the other games, the factory level design in this was actually pretty unique. Not sure if it's better than Battle for Volcano Island, because a lot of people say that's the best in the series, but I'll just have to wait and see when I actually get around to playing that one. Not a perfect game, but as a neat little crossover action platformer, Attack of the Toybots is still pretty good. That's all the videos I wanted to do for November out of the way. Look forward to next month, where in December I'll be teaming up with Red Ribbon Reviewers as usual, and we'll be talking about Christmas and holiday-themed media on my show. Until then, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough.
Not just cartoons. Arnold, Helga, Phoebe, Gerald, Sid, Grandpa, Stinky, Harold, SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy. Keep the Krabby Patties handy. Squidward, Tito, Twister, Reggie, Rocket, Otto's sister, Ginger, Hoodsy, Carl, Macy. Junior high school life is crazy. Not just cartoons.
We're Nicktoons.
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 Grandma sings, Pelvic rolls. Cat and dog have separate bowls. Invader Zim and Mrs. Bitters giving Dib a case of jitters. June and Henry, Baby Dill. Angelica and Phil and Lil. Susie, Kimmy, Chucky, Tommy. All their daddies and their mommies. Not just cartoons.
We're Nicktoons.
Not just cartoons.